There's strong language and adult humour in Rewind the Tube. And after the programme is finished, if you're going to bed, please don't forget to switch off your set.
There was once a time when the UK only had 3 TV channels. When the North East's greatest gifts to the world were shipbuilding and brown ale. And no one said rude words on television, ever. But things changed, my friends.
All of a sudden, with like one click, everything else looked incredibly naff.
Something radical was born.
Bursting on them and bursting in. Oh dear, well, completely bursting in.
But I've never seen anything like this.
It was loud. It was live.
Don't you think that this magnificent erection is going to be a bit wasted?
And it didn't give a damn.
This went out just as people were sitting down having their fish fingers on a Friday night. And boom!
When it worked, it was wonderful. When it was bad, it was bloody awful.
And it was like that to London, which was a great achievement.
And there wasn't an auto cue in sight.
And he's put a wonderful mask on my hair. It was made of horse shit, I think.
Really, that's wonderful.
If we'd have said, we're going to bring a stripper on, they would have said, go for it.
You know, I won't worry about it afterwards.
Just go for it, lads, you know.
I was quite the young man in those days.
So let's rewind to the 80s to bring the stars face to face with their younger selves.
I think I remember being a bit off my face, to be honest with you.
And relive a music show that electrified modern Britain.
My mum looks so young, she looks like a teenager.
This is where it all began. This was the original, this was the Tube. Welcome to God's country, Newcastle. Home of dodgy perms, proper beer, and the most brilliantly anarchic music show ever seen on British television.
Hello, Newcastle, rock and roll capital of...
well, sort of Newcastle and bits of Gateshead.
Nothing is left of the Tube, but in the hearts and minds of a generation, the legend lives on.
I went every week for the whole of the Tube. Just had a brilliant time.
I was a young punk, and eventually I got a ticket, and I got to see Kajagoogoo. It seemed to sort of drop in from another planet, almost.
As people were coming on stage, bands were just walking past you to go off. They were just next to you.
It was mayhem, kind of organised chaos. You didn't know what to expect.
And it sort of gave Top of the Pops a kick up the arse and said, this is what you should be doing.
The Tube shunned the mainstream from day one when it gate crashed into our homes at tea time in 1982.
It's November the 5th, and we're going to do something now that's going to go in the annals of television history. A live rock show. We've got an enormous firework display laid on.
From its very first series, the Tube seemed to strike a chord with a generation that felt increasingly divided under Margaret Thatcher.
If you ask people about the 80s, I guess it meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but on my street, there were a lot of pissed off people, I can tell you that.
First, we're going to talk about, yes, you guessed it, unemployment.
We didn't have any expectation of having a career. There was plenty of jobs that we could walk into, but pittance wages and, you know, nothing expected to last longer than 3 months for.
I'm a labourer, that's all I want, is a labouring job. She's took them all away.
Broadcast from the industrial heart of the North East, the Tube's launch came at a time when the great social, sexual and political battle lines of the 80s were being drawn. It was a perfect storm.
I think the first thing you have to remember is that it came from the north. And that was specifically important. It was like this other crowd knocking on the door and saying, we want in.
The Tube was a crucial part of Channel 4's launch. And show network boss Jeremy Isaacs felt could shake up a flaccid TV landscape and give his channel an edge.
I know that an awful lot of television is aimed at the so-called family audience. We're going to do some programmes that will drive mum and dad out of the room.
Channel 4's desire to boot the nation's parents from the living room began to take shape with Time T's producers Andrea Wunfer and Malcolm Gerry. The plan was simple.
I've got two things to say to you. Keep it live and give it balls. Bye-bye. And that was it. He was gone.
This unconventional show would require some unconventional presentation. Something that producers would find in the form of ex-Squeeze keyboardist Jules Holland and gossip columnist Paula Yates, picked despite having about as much professional TV experience as a pair of socks.
Sorry, Jules is making me laugh.
We were just hopeless, really, just absolutely hopeless. But we didn't notice that.
Well, here it is, the studio where it's all going to be happening.
A massive new TV event like this required the perfect act to signal the show's intent.
I know she goes to Bruno's.
This honour fell to Sunderland's finest, the Toy Dolls. Remember them?
Hey, we made history. The first band on the Tube.
Nah, me neither.
I mean, to be honest, we had to be as quick as possible because we came straight off, got in the van, then we went and played a workman's club around the corner after. But that was part of what we were doing at the time.
From the outset, the Tube was unique. Not only was it live, but everything from the bands to even the audience members felt different.
We'd done Top of the Pops and things, and it was all kind of very shepherded and very controlled, you know, and they'd move the audience from there to there, and you go, OK, now you lot clap, and everybody had to clap. But there, it was like being thrust into a kind of football audience, you know, they were shouting at you and you were shouting back, and then you suddenly remember that it was live.
The Tube became the place to discover cutting-edge acts from around the world and was a launch pad for future icons, including Madonna, U2, and Manchester's finest, the Smiths.
You know, we were a big rock band, we'd done all of them, but I thought it was vital that you get on it because otherwise you weren't making it, you weren't cool, you had nothing to say anymore.
And now, live on the Tube, it's Yazoo!
Throughout the 80s, the Tube Studios became a safe haven for those who slipped through the cracks of Middle England.
As a young gentleman, do you find that you get sort of beaten up or anything?
Very occasionally.
It was the platform for freaks because everyone pretty much was a freak, I think. Even Duran Duran, who were the mainstream, there was something kind of freaky about them. There was even with them,
And in an era when being queer still made you a freak in the eyes of the mainstream, the Tube had the balls to put gay presenters and pop stars centre stage.
Suddenly, gay people weren't hated anymore. Young people were so much more aware of what was going on in issues, politically and everything at the time, and I think that went into that programme as well, and it was like the spirit of the programme, really.
In 1980s Britain, perhaps the freakiest freaks of all were a gang of synth-wheeling, sex-obsessed scousers.
There'd been some sort of forays into alternative sexuality, but coy ones. But this was very sort of in-your-face, openly gay and unapologetic.
But before the number ones, the controversy and that outrageous video, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, were just another unsigned band when they were plucked from obscurity and thrust into our living rooms by the Tube.
There is absolutely no other broadcaster that would have shown us nationally or even provincially. We were considered too hot to handle by the music industry in a sense.
It's been decades since Holly and friends last donned their fishnets for the camera. And now, for the first time in 30 years, Holly has an opportunity to relive his TV debut.
Amazing. I think I remember being a bit off my face, to be honest with you. I think most of us were signing on, on Social Security, and things were pretty desperate at the time. In Liverpool, there was mass unemployment, and it was just a very exciting moment for us. Like Miss Jean Brodie, I was in my prime.
One of the ladies sat on the lens on the first run through. I thought, this is going to be different.
Cod pieces, nipples everywhere, whips, chains, lots of lube. The phones went white hot.
What the fuck is this? This is fantastic. I really was like turning it up like, God, I've never seen this. It's amazing.
I was actually a little afraid because I thought, wow, this is the best thing that I've heard in years.
Good stuff. Well, the first question that's burning in my mind, please don't point that at me, loaded guns. First question is going on.
Frankie's explosive Tube debut led to the band finally getting signed. But before Relax could conquer the world, Holly and the band would trigger one of pop's biggest controversies when DJ Mike Reid got the song banned by the BBC.
On one level, I realised this was the biggest endorsement that you could possibly get for being a rebellious, dangerous rock and roll pop band. And on the other hand, it was a great disappointment.
Mike Reid.
Yeah, he was the one that said, I don't like the sound of this. I'm not going to play it.
He's the culture and media spokesperson for UKIP.
He's obviously moved forward then.
Remember, this is the song they dared not show, but of course we show it because we're daring people.
The huge success of Relax helped boost the Tube's reputation for discovering new music whilst giving Channel 4 the rebellious edge it craved.
Certainly, working up in Counties and Newcastle, there was a sense of, you know, putting a finger up to the BBC.
In just one series, the Tube had revolutionised the pop charts and sent shockwaves through the world of broadcasting. Despite their overnight success, life was about to get a whole lot harder. In the early 80s, Britain was in a state of flux, and a brand new TV channel was determined to play by its own rules. But the winds of change hadn't reached Fleet Street, where the bastions of tradition were sharpening their knives to take down a raucous new music show with headlines like these.
The whole of Channel 4 was getting a backlash. The red tops ran the headlines, get this channel off the airways. There were letters to Number 10 saying that Channel 4 should be taken down. And the Tube was used as the exemplar of everything that was wrong with this new channel.
You might have read in The Sun that the Tube is going to be axed. This is, of course, completely untrue.
As a new government began to implement radical social change in Britain, an angry new alternative began to fight back. In 1980 and 81, one marginalised group took matters into their own hands when the streets of Britain erupted under the flames of racial tension.
I grew up in Brixton, and you know, we were feeling the pinch, and we're talking about black British people here. I used to add half an hour more travelling time into going to see things like films, because I knew I'd get stopped by the old Bill and miss the beginning of the film. You know, that's how bad it was. And then there came a time when we kind of said, you know what, we've had enough. And that kicked off the Brixton riots.
Nobody quite knows why the rioting started, but when it did, about half a dozen policemen were forced by a barrage of bricks and bottles into this cafe here.
I'm black, I'm British. What about it?
The only way to defuse the situation is by decreasing the presence of the police within the area at the present time.
Against this backdrop, a new sound emerged from across the pond that chimed perfectly with Britain's frustrated youth. Hip-hop.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
But if you wanted to see, as well as hear, the likes of Grandmaster Flash in the flesh, there was only one place you could go.
When hip-hop broke, initially the Tube was the only place you could really see it and feel its effect.
We got broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the stage. You know
the Tube was so far ahead of the curve, they even had their very own Geordie breakdance crew. They could even do the robot link.
Yeah, we were just like the Tube breakdancers at the time, you know. We were asked to go on the show.
three lads from Washington trying to be the top break dancers in the world at the time, but we were pretty lame, really. It was new, and people hadn't seen people doing it in front of them, and so it all went down pretty well, and I guess we kind of complimented the show a little bit.
This is 30 years ago, like.
Good job I had the cod liver oil this morning.
Certainly, it was very instrumental in bringing a lot of these acts, kind of legendary names that we'd only seen on vinyl, onto our screens. Sometimes that was horrific. When we first saw Grandmaster Flash and what they were all wearing, they all looked like the Village People. That was kind of scary.
Another hip-hop legend first seen via the Tube was leader of the Zulu nation himself, Africa Bambaataa.
Oh, I was thinking we definitely was looking funky right there. I was thinking like the audience probably say, "Wow, these cats look like they from some other planet or something." You know, in hip hop, we don't care whether people are gonna enjoy us or not enjoy us. We just gonna do our thing and hope that they enjoy what we bring to them. Also, to us, we was gonna do what we gonna do anyway. Because we was hip hop.
I guess race didn't really come into it with the Tube, you know. By contrast, I remember once I was asked to be interviewed on MTV in the early 80s, and they ring up Don Letts, come and interview us, the other man who makes all the Clash videos. And I go down there and everyone's looking at me kind of weird, I don't know what's wrong, and I get taken into a room by a guy who embarrassingly tells me, "Don, we can't do the interview at this time because we didn't realise you were black."
Hip-hop was just one of many ways that the Tube gave a voice to a generation desperate to be heard.
It was a kick against the kind of stultifying, kind of repressive atmosphere that existed not just in TV and music, but generally in early 80s Thatcher Britain.
As the Tube continued to shake things up from Newcastle, the nation was unravelling. Spiralling unemployment, strikes, and even the vague threat of nuclear war would kickstart one of the most divisive periods of the 1980s.
In Thatcher's Britain, the whole of society was divided. You know, Thatcher's whole way of doing politics was to divide everyone into them and us.
Nobody expected the revolution to come from the right. Nobody expected it to be a woman, and no one expected a handbag. But, you know, in a lot of ways, Margaret Thatcher was simply Johnny Rotten in drag.
It's not much of a life when you're on the dole, you know. You get out one night a week and that's it. You've got no, well, there's no future, nothing really, is there?
We really did fight against the establishment, and we did everything we could to rail against Thatcher. She was deeply unpopular. We hated her.
Opposition to the Iron Lady found its most subversive voice in a new breed of comedian. And the Tube was only too happy to give them a platform on live television.
The Tube brought comedy into an arena where it could be freer, and it could be on TV without being in a straitjacket.
Jules, please give me my job back. Please, Jules.
I'm sorry.
Jules, I am heavy with your child.
I'm sorry, I'm
Jules,
sorry.
Please. What about all the blowjobs?
I'm sorry, thank you.
It was one of the first programmes to do that, and I think that became this explosion of stand-up comedy that thankfully dominates our television screens today.
Prior to the Tube, stand-up comedy on TV was stuck in a bygone era of dodgy one-liners and mother-in-law jokes. It certainly did not look like this.
Fame, I'm going to live forever. I'm going to learn how to fly.
Being 12 and seeing Rick Mayall behave the way he did as an adult was just so exciting. And I just completely fell in love. They made me see that comedy can be something that I could be a part of as well, because there was no rules.
It's not class or ideology, it's not colour, creed or roots. The only thing we have in common is Dr. Martens, Dr. Martens, Dr. Martens, strikers and pickets wear them, machinery won't tear them. Mrs. Thatcher and Mr. McGregor simply can't bear them.
Anti-Thatcher anger exploded in 1984 when on the Tube's very doorstep, the miners' strike would plunge the government into the biggest fight of the decade.
I remember one day in particular when I left on a Friday to go to record the show, and I couldn't get out of our street because of the police barricades. And you're not talking about 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 police. There were well on to 1,000 police in riot gear. Elements of the Northeast, I think, never recovered from that period.
By going up to Newcastle to perform on the Tube, you were going into that area, you were going into that context during the miners' strike, and I think that came through in the show.
For those at the heart of the conflict, there was a sense that the mainstream media wasn't representing the voice of the miners.
There was far more stone and other missile throwing than I've seen since we started here, what, 2 or 3 weeks ago. So certainly they have stepped up the violence.
TV was what terrible people we are, we're jackboot thugs, we're the enemy within. You know, they would show pictures of us throwing bricks at the police. They wouldn't show the pictures of the police beating the hell out of us with truncheons and stuff.
On November the 11th, 1984, the tables would finally turn. That night, the Tube made history as a group of radicalised musicians attempted to give a voice to the miners.
What would you say to the man who says politics and music don't mix?
Well, that's like saying politics and life don't mix, and surely music's got to reflect life, isn't it?
In a show featuring Billy Bragg, punk upstart Chris Dean and his band the Redskins hijacked the Tube when they invited coal miner Norman Strike to speak directly to the nation.
Chris said, you know, it's live television, and we've got 20 seconds because we reckon after 20 seconds they'll pull the plug and, you know, you'll be off.
Now, 3 decades on, Norman is about to see his moment in the spotlight for the very first time.
Do you know they're a corking band, the Redskins?
They were a great band, I really miss them.
On tambourine, on additional percussion, and on strike for 35 weeks at Durham.
Look at the earring, look at the hair.
But though the studio audience heard Norman's speech in its entirety, viewers at home were greeted with deafening silence.
The stark reality of the miners' strike, and, you know, Norman being from up that part of the world and representing it, bringing it into the studio, perhaps, you know, the producers, the director thought we'd gone a bit too far, maybe.
People thought that I'd censored it, that we'd pulled the plug. So I had to go on local radio and national radio the next day and do all these interviews about, no, we didn't censor him. It was a genuine technical fuck-up, and one that I regret to this day.
I think the mic was deliberately cut off. I think when Chris introduced me and said, you know, on percussion and whatever, I think the producer thought, oh, bloody hell, we're not having that. This is a pop show, it's not a political thing, and just pulled the plug or pressed the switch or did something.
Well, it's been almost 30 years since Norman stood on that front line, but whilst Thatcher may have won the war, we give the last word to Mr. Strike himself and that unheard speech. Take it away, sir.
There's been 2 miners killed during this strike, 6 serious injuries, 3,000 people hospitalised, 10,000 people charged with offences. Miner support groups are springing up all over the country. They're supporting us, you should be supporting them.
There's a lesson in all this, though, for the next generation of agitators, and that is, if the lead singer's mic is working, use that one.
Live controversy on the Tube had become par for the course. But the show was about to push its own brand of anarchy further than ever before.
Sex at tea time on the young people's programme The Tube, which these 2 viewers say is cynical and corrupting.
The 1980s, the decade of opportunity.
Sweet dreams are made of the
But for Britain's ever-increasing female workforce, it was still very much a man's world. Quite frankly, it was a bit of a jock fest. And TV was no different. But one woman would blaze a skirt-shaped trail. Instead of hiding her femininity, she used it to her advantage And by God, it worked.
I'll hate him. He never shuts up. Have you noticed? Gordon Bennett.
No understanding whatsoever of Los
I
Angeles.
think that
More
what you
Paula
should
Yates
do
on the television is what you're
is
thinking.
Keep your eye
But I
on
don't
one.
think so. I think more.
There really was and only ever will be one Paula Yates. That woman was so authentically herself. She created herself. Paula was not trying to copy anybody.
Paula came to the attention of the Tube bosses when she launched her own book, which was described by none other than Andy Warhol as the greatest work of art in the last decade.
One of the more surreal additions to the Prezi market is a book called Rock Stars in Their Underpants. It's been put together by record mirror hackette Paula Yates, and it's full of pics of famous pop stars attired in little more than their knickers.
Rock Stars in Their Underpants, which, funnily enough, my daughter gave my wife as a present the other day.
I finally realised that nobody was going to put me on their coffee table book, so I'd have to do my own. So I was lying in bed one night thinking about it, and I saw Bob's underpants hanging over the end of the bed, droopily. And I thought, this is it, Rock Stars in Their Underpants.
No, I remember doing... Look, in fact, look, I've got a huge knob, look. I mean, compared to Lemmy on the next page, we forget it, you know.
There are some super people in here, and I'm one of them.
Holland, yeah. This is the worst book ever, you know.
On that particular occasion, I think she came and she had food poisoning or something, so I took her around to my mother's, who gave her some tea, and she was sick all over my mother's sort of sofa. And we became great friends after that.
Pictures of pop stars in their kecks aside, it was Paula's shameless flirting and unconventional presenting that helped set the Tube apart.
This gets funny. I know, well, if you get a bit lippy, I'll give you a quick poke. Yeah.
You're in enough trouble, isn't it?
Why?
The things that she would say around us as kids was completely inappropriate, but it was, like, hilarious, you know.
Don't you think that this magnificent erection is going to be a bit wasted?
I definitely knew a lot more than I should about the ways of the world at 8 than a lot of my friends because of my mother's jokes, let's just put it that way.
What was so refreshing about Paula was she didn't care. You know, just because she was an overtly sexy woman did not mean she was dumb. She was a strong, smart woman, and she held her own.
Blue. And what are you wearing under your trousers? Nothing.
Paula was a TV natural. From her first saucy comment, she was an instant hit with the Tube audience.
My mum looks so young, she looks like a teenager, so it's funny to see her sort of looking like that. Her presenting style is just like how she was, so it feels like having a conversation with her because she was just the same as she was on screen. Like, she was exactly the same if you were to sit down and talk to her. It wasn't like a put-on personality, that's just how she was.
Paula's popularity with the fans of the Tube wasn't reflected in the press, with regular attacks like these.
I remember when, and this would be Tube time, when it was announced Paula was pregnant, the NME said, "Isn't one Geldof bastard enough?" You know, and I mean, I don't mind that, but it hurt her.
Studio. And what can I say? One small step for pop music, one large step for fat girls.
I think the music press at the time and a lot of the press of the time were scared of women, you know. I think they were scared of strong, sexual women. It wasn't really allowed, and that's why I think they picked on her.
Now we have one of the greatest performers of all time, the legendary Iggy Pop!
Mother.
With the tabloids on their backs, Jules and Paula decided to fight fire with fire, pushing the established conventions of television presenting into completely uncharted territory.
And here she is. You see this completely natural rapport. See, the other thing I think is that element 6.
Now tell us about your virginity. Jules says, when did you lose it?
It's all going far too fast.
Paula, don't you remember?
And now we go to Jules Holland and his rhythm stick.
I mean, I suppose the big thing, I mean, where things aren't acceptable is when they're not funny. And I don't know how funny that was. But a lot of letters, they said, well, we want more sex on the show. So, all fun.
It was live, and occasionally he'd slip up and he'd say fuck or shit or, you know,
Or beep or beep. You're saying
No, it didn't used to say. It was live, Martin. They couldn't say beep. They had to say fuck or shit.
Okay.
Well, the fact is that a remarkable number of young people do watch the Tube, and some of them tell us, our critics are middle-aged fuddy-duddies who don't understand that the outspoken anarchic style of the Tube is what makes it the hottest pop show on television.
The Tube's willingness to take risks and the fact parents and the press hated it made it must-see TV for the 80s teenager.
You know, what is this? It's a music show? Is it a kind of magazine show? And then they throw in kind of left-wing comedy as well.
The anarchy of the Tube studios became a launch pad for many of today's biggest stars.
Vic Reeves was at a small pub in Deptford and was then somewhere else, I think Goldsmith's Tavern, and he was just so surrealist and just great that thought we've got to get him on.
And this is the South London Boozer where Jules discovered Vic all those years ago.
Ah, this is the place. It's changed a bit. And this is where the stage was here. That's about the height of it there. That was my dressing room over there where it says disabled. It was still a toilet then, but we didn't have disabled toilets in those days. Just abled people. There wasn't anyone disabled anywhere in the world in those days.
This is regarding celebrities named after popular modern terrains, i.e. Bobby Moore or Edward Heath. Madonna, can you name me another?
Within, I would think, about 3 or 4 weeks from me not having a clue about comedy, opening a comedy club, being a comedian, within 4 weeks I was on the Tube, on the telly.
Somehow, Jules convinced his bosses to stage a lavish production of Vic's live show for a Christmas special.
What's this? A saucy sex bed? Yes, this cheeky water bed.
Oh, there I am, revolving round.
It's pretty good, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. I've got an earring. I had an earring in. I was quite the young man in those days. Well, that's the first time I've ever seen that, and I don't think I ever want to watch it again.
Not content with just showcasing the best of Britain's alternative, the Tube began to spread their anarchic spirit further afield. A classic Tube adventure saw Jules travel across New Orleans, complete with customised convertible.
The smashing of it was Jules. He did like smashing things, actually. He really did.
As well as cameos from legends such as Fats Domino, Jules' road trip featured a number of stunts, including a daring explosion coordinated by his own mum.
When it came to blowing the car up, it was agreed that me and Gilson would walk towards the car, and as we walked towards the car, there'd be a little twig on the ground. And when we walked past that twig, the person could see, and then they'd blow the car up. And the fellow who'd arranged all this said to my mum, well, as a special treat, why don't you do it? And we realised afterwards he was just saying that then if I'd been blown up for good, it would all be my mum's fault, and, you know, we're not going to sue her because it's your mum sort of thing anyway. And then we get closer and closer, and somebody says, well, they've passed the twig, quick, push it. And so she pushes it, and by this time we really are close. And when you see at the end of that film, the bit where Gilson and I the thing goes off, it really is a bit too close for comfort. A lot of the Tube was like that, you know. Whereas nowadays, generally, everywhere in television and in life, that sort of thing doesn't go on. Maybe it's just as well, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm not here to make judgments.
Having travelled the world, in 1984, the Tube was about to help change it.
It's Christmas time.
And it all started with a chance phone call, the day after harrowing accounts of famine in Ethiopia were shown on British television.
So I waited until I thought Paula was at the Tube, and I called her. I said, who's on? And she said, Midge is here.
Paula was screaming at me from the makeup room to come and talk to Bob on the phone. And I thought it was something to do with the fact that he hadn't his house keys or whatever.
And I said, I think we should do something. He said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to record a song and, like, you know, get it out by Christmas, make 100 grand, give it to Oxfam. And he said, yeah, sure, I'm in.
The Tube gained an exclusive when they were invited to capture the historic 24-hour recording unfold at Psalm Studios in West London.
None of us knew what it was going to turn into. It was a sort of a Sunday afternoon, and everyone was rolling up at different times. You know, some people came on the bus, other people had limos with bodyguards, and it was a bizarre gathering.
Do They Know It's Christmas boasted a lineup of almost entirely Tube-related artists.
All the pop stars de nos jours were there gathered that afternoon at that one single place up in Newcastle. It had come out of the Tube, it had come out of the presenter and the friends we had on that telephone.
The Tube's involvement with Band Aid saw the single become the biggest selling song in UK chart history and was arguably the show's finest hour. Yet whilst the Tube may have helped save lives, back home there wasn't an Ice Cube's chance in hell it could be saved from itself.
It was a mistake on my part, and I'd like to apologise to everybody at home who saw it, and indeed Channel 4, and assure you that that sort of thing won't happen again.
In just a few years, Channel 4's anarchic live music show The Tube had become the most talked about and notorious programme on television. By the late 1980s, Middle England had had enough. Campaigners like Mary Whitehouse were on a mission to shut down Channel 4. And now the moral police were banging on the Tube's door in the shape of viewer complaint show Right to Reply.
You've got a vision mixer, you've fast fingers up there in Time Tees. You could have cut away to Michael Brown's face. You didn't have to stay with those sequences.
But that depends if we thought that the sequences were as disturbing as Jim thought, and I have to say that we didn't.
I think for the first time ever, there were actual complaints about the people who were on Right to Reply, vis-a-vis myself and the commissioning editor, complaints on the next Right to Reply about our attitude.
So silly. 12 people have run Channel 4 out of 1.5 million.
Can I say something?
Let's hear from Channel 4. Let's hear from Channel 4.
And we had to go on again to apologise that we weren't contrite enough about getting things wrong.
Yes, that was a little personal advertising for what's-his-name, Geary, wasn't it? My goodness, wow.
For 5 years, the Tube weathered the storm of public outcry and press hostility. Until one day, disaster struck.
Here we are. I'm very sorry to have had to cut away, but we are live on ITV1 now. This must be 1,000 times more interesting than the news.
The moment that would plunge the Tube into its biggest drama yet was not even on one of its own broadcasts, but during a live trail promoting the show on ITV's Children Hour.
I was probably 3 feet away from Jules when he did this live-to-air trail.
He did as a matter-of-fact thing. He wasn't trying to be cheeky, chappy, which people thought he was. He wasn't. It was a slip. It was a slip.
And he kind of ran out of words. So the semantics that he uttered were...
I think it was be there or be a completely ungroovy fucker. I think it was probably what it was.
And I looked at Jeff Wamper and said, did he say what I think he just said?
He ain't going to get away with this one. He's just not going to get away with it.
I got a letter from Mary Whitehouse, and I wrote back and said, I quite agree with you. It is unacceptable. I don't want to be swearing in front of sort of children and all that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there was a dreadful slip of the tongue, and I said something that was really rather revolting, and it was a mistake on my part, and I'd like to apologise to everybody at home who saw it, and indeed Channel 4, and assure you that that sort of thing won't happen again. Anyway.
When Jules made his error, he came to up the creek, which was then by the Blackwall Tunnel, and on that night, he came in there, and everyone applauded. Everyone gave him a big round of applause.
For a second. It's new.
Despite his apology, Jules was facing severe discipline from TV regulatory body, the IBA.
They wanted to sack him. They wanted rid of him. I mean, the IBA really took it very, very seriously. and threatened to, said this jeopardises the existence of the show.
Thanks to the efforts of the Tube bosses, Jules escaped with a mere 6-week suspension. Groovy! But this was 1987, and Britain had changed beyond recognition since that first Tube broadcast 5 years earlier.
There was definitely a sea change there, that when you did get the sense that punk ethos had gone, and then it did become about, the self-made man. Thatcherism did become more of a, ingrained into the common man.
By 1987, Britain was in the throes of an economic boom. The anti-establishment sentiment of the early 80s was beginning to give way to a more yuppified culture. As they witnessed Britain transform once again, the team behind the Tube knew there was only one thing to do.
The Tube was never ever in decline, but I think we all thought at that time it was coming to an end, It was like, and we didn't want it to dip. We wanted to leave it. We wanted to leave it as it had started, with a bang,
In true Tube style, Jules hatched a plan to depart in spectacular fashion whilst getting his own back on Channel 4. The cheeky scamp.
I've been mistreated on this programme and I've had enough. And I think people at home, if you've had enough of the same, just get out.
Jules' live-on-air departure took a surreal twist when he suddenly found himself flung into 60s sci-fi thriller The Prisoner.
I think The Prisoner was a bit of a thing, a fuck you Channel 4 moment, because we thought that it was getting a bit sanitised, and Jules thought it should get a kick up the arse.
1 week ago, you mysteriously walked out of one of the most popular child exploitation programmes on television. Why?
I think maybe in some ways I'd become a prisoner of the programme, because also there was a certain thing with the whole programme had to be sort of edgy all the time, but it couldn't go on being edgy without sort of just being taken off air, whether I was there or not. And so it had become a prisoner of itself, really.
Now fearing that their own programmes would get them pulled off air, Channel 4 had no choice but to grow up.
The day that I felt I wasn't getting the buzz that I do every Thursday and Friday from the programme, and the massive feedback and the tapes arriving on the desk, I'll jack it in.
Changes at Channel 4 and the changes at Tyne Tees, there was a new kind of morality which was blowing a chill wind through the corridors of the Tube studio.
You change the fucking Tube or it's gone, and we said, fuck you, we're not going to change it. That's actually what happened.
So, the illusion is shattered and the bubble has finally burst!
On April the 24th, 1987, the Tube departed the airwaves with an emotional farewell from some famous friends.
It's a sad day for rock and roll.
It's all over for them. Best rock and roll show on TV for the Tubes.
And I think it's really awful that it's coming off Channel 4. Damn you.
Who's this guy anyway?
After 5 years of panicking parents and causing trouble at tea time, the Tube was no more.
And the IBA can't touch us now. It's over. I don't care.
There was a sadness in the air because everybody knew it was over. A little bit of British pop culture died that day.
So then, this is the very last link. And there's one thing I've never ever done on camera before, and that is kiss a girl. I'm going to kiss Paula.
Have you rung the mirror? I don't want to do it unless you've rung the mirror.
Often, if you're in the middle of something that's a success, you're sometimes in the centre of a whirlwind and you're not kind of aware of it so much. So I don't think it was really till it was probably all over that we realised it was what a success it was.
After the Tube, it's like the shutters were brought down again and everything got back to that conservative miming type vibe. And I don't think anything's really come along since to kind of knock it off its pedestal.
The airwaves seemed to be taken over by
PWL product. A kind of factory churning out soap stars.
OK, let's get rid of the lunatics and bring the straight people back.
Rebellion almost became part of the past.
I mean, it's interesting. A few people have said, both in print and to me personally, that it felt like the end of the 80s when the Tube finished.
What year did it finish? Silly so it's 1989 is the end of the 1980s.
But it did feel like it was the end of an era.
For 5 frenetic years, these nutters from Newcastle fired a rocket up the arse of the establishment and changed British pop culture forever. Today, the Tube's once glorious empire has been reduced to dust.
I went up to see what the building where the Tube was, and it was very sad because there's nothing there. And that's very sad because it was once a great industry of people making great things, and for it to be reduced to rubble is both symbolically very sad, but actually really sad because there's nothing left.
OK, so here we are. We've stopped here on City Road, outside the site of the old buildings of Tyne-Tees Television. I do it because I want to keep the memory of the Tube alive for another generation, not just the people who watched it. Still touring, still doing it. We're dead opposite, literally, the Tube entrance, that strange perspex tunnel that Rick Mayor came running out of and spewing up all over the camera.
There was that edginess to the programme. Some of it came from the presenters, some of it came from the bands, but I think the real edge came from where it was and when it was.
It's where we found Iggy Pop wandering, bandaged from head to foot, 1 minute before he was due to go on stage.
It was about the beauty of madness, the beauty of chaos, and somehow getting it under control.
And that's what made the Tube so special. We weren't tied by convention.
I think it's a real travesty that there isn't anything like that on the screen at the moment, because actually I think the landscape is crying out for it.
Just bloody make it, somebody. Please. We need a new one.
My soul for rock and roll, man and boy, 82 to 87, amongst the rubble. The building's gone, but the music, and as you know, lives on forever.
That's right, this has got to be the greatest record of the year. Pump up the volume, pump up the volume, pump up the volume.